Greetings, Guardians, my name is Bife here. Back in the Witch Queen and Season of Defiance, we saw Zavala's faith in the Traveler being tested. For the longest time, he'd clung to the base moral framework that many of us were taught back in the early days of Destiny 1. This idea that the Light, Guardians, and the Traveler, broadly speaking, were on the side of good, and that forces such as the Hive, the Witness, the Black Fleet, and those who used the power of darkness were unfailingly going to fall to evil. But then, Savathûn was chosen by the Traveler to become a light-bearer. Zavala raged against that fact, and it brought him to question everything that he had known about the Traveler's intentions. When the Witness finally strode through the portal into the Traveler's Pale Heart, and its Shadow Legion forces killed his close friend Amanda Holliday, Zavala would find his convictions broken. The Traveler had turned silent. Its great enemy had won. Seemingly, the Traveler had just allowed itself to be conquered. At the side of Amanda Holliday's grave, he cursed the Traveler. He cursed it for its inaction, for its inability to save those that he loved, those that he considered family, and for forsaking him in his time of great need, forsaking the city, and seemingly allowing itself to fall to darkness. This must have broken him personally, but also it might have broken his greater convictions and his beliefs about the nature of light and dark itself. Now, as the Witness moves to enact the final shape, we see Zavala asking questions that years ago would have shaken him to his core. Now, as he's been forced to reevaluate his time in service to the Traveler, Zavala is seeking knowledge about the darkness. But first, I need to give a heartfelt thank you to Advanced GG. That doesn't normally happen, a heartfelt thank you at the beginning of my sponsors, but they were kind enough to continue supporting the channel and the work that myself and Martin do over here, whilst also knowing that I had the lurgy back in December and wasn't even able to speak and record videos properly. So a major thank you to them for being awesome sponsors and for being understanding. It's not always something I expect because, you know, this is a business relationship, but the team over at Advanced GG understands that it's important to let creators create and actually live within the bounds of normal life. So thank you to them. It's a huge boon to have you guys at my side. Advanced GG rocks. If you're looking for an energy supplement that you can use during gaming for a consistent 4 to 5 hour energy burst with a slow come down that doesn't lead to a crash, this is for you. It is the only gaming supplement that is clinically proven to improve your focus and performance. So go ahead, give it a try if you haven't already. My collector's edition flavor, Pink Lemonade, is out right now, and you can find that at the link down below in the description. That's advancedgg/Bife. And you can use code LAWDADDY at checkout to get a discount. Thanks again to Advanced GG for sponsoring this video. Anyway, back to the lore. Before we get into the further details of all this, it should really be noted that for Zavala to start asking questions about the darkness and its potential uses is a dramatic step indeed. This isn't just because Zavala has always personally been staunchly opposed to it, but also because it creates political tension within the Guardian ranks. That might sound odd for me to use the word politics here, but where the light and dark are concerned, ideological values are almost always seen as coming into conflict. These divisions have split the tower and caused a remarkable degree of strife before, and with Zavala's decision to at least investigate and look further into the darkness, these tensions could flare up once again. It's not politics as far as any proper system of governance is concerned, but it is the interpersonal relationships that determine the status quo of the Guardians and their structure of power within the tower. I'm sure some of you are hearing all this and you'll probably be all like,
politics, how tiresome.
But trust me when I say, this matters. It may come up in the future and we'll get into it in a bit. The actual moment where Zavala looks to explore and at least understand the darkness further can be found in the Scalar Potential Pulse Rifle. The attached lore tab contains an archival note of a classified conversation between Zavala and Elsie Bray, aka the Exo Stranger. Needless to say, with her tendencies to use a particular darkness power over others, this note makes a lot of discussion about the power of stasis. Take a listen. There's power in perspective. Van Net Europa Wideband, audio channel 2113C, encryption enabled, Cryptarchy Archive Delta 4F, annotated, classified. Is that everything, Commander? Well, no. There's one more thing. I wanted to ask you about stasis. What it means for you to wield the darkness. I was wondering if you might ask me that. For me, stasis is intimately tied to perception, and to time. Time? Yes, stasis has the power to slow molecular activity, a process that we normally associate with gravity, relativity and all that. You're talking about time dilation. Exactly. We think of time as steady, but that's only because we experience it from a fixed perspective. When I freeze something with stasis, I'm changing its time frame relative to myself and the world around me. Stasis relies in part on one's perception of reality? Is that why Osiris always emphasizes self-control in using the darkness? That's his way of framing things. He views stasis as exerting authority over oneself and others. And you don't? In my view, the goal of stasis is not to control the object or even my own mind. It's to change my perspective. To see the object moving at the speed of my own thoughts, not the speed of matter. And just seeing it differently is enough? Is that so hard to imagine? It's very similar to how you use void light, manipulating space-time and gravitational fields. In fact, I would argue that void has more in common with stasis than it does with solar or arc. Perhaps they're reverse sides of the same coin. And using stasis doesn't worry you, even after everything you've seen? It did. For a time. I feared that using stasis would corrupt me, as I've seen others corrupted. But after what seemed like 1,000 years trapped in that interminable loop, it gradually dawned on me. The fear was the corruption. As long as fear gripped me, light or darkness made no matter. Once I accepted that, the darkness ceased to be frightening. It was another matter of perspective. Thank you, Elsie. You've given me a lot to think about. For some reason, your explanation makes me more comfortable with the idea. Anytime, Commander. It's all a matter of perspective. Transcription ends. So this little note of the lore ends with Zavala just about getting comfortable with the idea of what stasis is, and with the idea that it isn't a force that is necessarily guaranteed to corrupt Guardians. That's a huge shift for him personally, even just asking about stasis is. Whilst the passage does tell us a lot about stasis itself and its relationship to the individual, perspective, time and control, it has far wider reaching implications if Zavala chooses to continue exploring this path. And this is where all that politics I mentioned before really comes in. Back in the days of Beyond Light, we saw the Vanguard, Zavala and Ikora, talking to us about the dangers of stasis and its uses. Zavala even made a point of coming along to Europa to talk to us personally about how he absolutely did not approve of our use of it in the field, even though it was necessary to our mission. That hardline stance has most certainly waned over the years, especially when it became clear that the Drifter, Eris Morn, and a huge number of Guardians had started to use darkness for themselves. Regardless, this was the official line from Vanguard leadership. The use of stasis was not officially permitted and was highly frowned upon. This stance was clearly ignored by a ton of us, myself included, yourself probably included. But it was also a stance that some serious hardline factions within the Guardian Orders opposed. None are more vocal about this than the Praxic Creed. This predominantly warlock order is known for its staunch beliefs about the inherently good nature of the light, but also for the decisive action its members take against those that use the darkness. Back in the simplistic days of Destiny 1, I would have considered most of us aligned vaguely with these philosophical values. I certainly considered myself to be. As time has gone on, I think we've all learned more about the true nature of the darkness, and my own perspective, as well as I'm sure many of yours, has shifted. The Praxics, however, have stayed largely the same and have been a persistent watchdog against the use of the darkness in the tower by the Guardians and against the darkness's influence. In a certain sense, they're like Destiny's witch hunters. When Arnor Mahal, one of the most powerful Praxic agents and a close confidant of Ikora Rey, decided to investigate the Drifter, her reasoning for doing so was relatively simple. The Drifter didn't represent the same overt force of crushing darkness that the Hive or the Taken or figures such as Oryx or Xivu Arath did. Instead, he was supposedly more dangerous to the Guardians of the Tower because he represented a slow, corruptive influence that would begin to change the minds of Guardians about the use of the power of darkness. In this way, he posed a great threat in the same way that Thorn and Dredgen Yor and the Shadows of Yor did. As the Drifter was telling Guardians to embrace the dark in Gambit, Arnor Mahal and her fellow Praxic warlocks were watching. The Praxic Order is perhaps the most extreme example of this, but they reflect in my mind a far larger sentiment within the old Guardian establishment, those orders that existed long before our time destroying the Black Garden's heart in Destiny 1 Vanilla. Our own wave of new Guardians, those that have existed in the last 10 years, are not as entrenched in their views as those that came from the old guard might be. They have a more binary perspective of the light and dark, but they still hold a degree of sway. Perhaps more importantly, some of their views inevitably have reflected for a long time on the citizenry below the tower in the Last City proper. It's worth remembering that there are many examples of citizens being scared to death of a Guardian who came to their defense using the powers of darkness, no matter what they be. Rumors of Guardians having used darkness have spread like wildfire in the city, and it is worth remembering that those citizens who once believed we were infallible protectors have slowly started to lose faith in us. And all this has come back to the official note of what is being said. Trust has been lost in the Vanguard over time. The Guardians have begun to lose their faith in the Vanguard ever since they forbade the pursuit of Uldren Sov, Cade's killer. And it only got worse from there with the intervention of dark powers. And with that, Zavala's hardline stance on the darkness may have been relatively steadfast at first, but over time it has been forced to quietly shift. Osiris's prominent use of Strand in order to investigate the Veil, the arrival of the Exo-Stranger and her teachings of the power of stasis, the temporary ascension of Eris Morn into a hive god of vengeance, and our own exploits against the Witness and its disciples that could only have been done with the use of darkness. All of these points speak to a greater notion. The world is a lot more complicated than what we used to know. The reality of the situation we are living in is on a collision course with those old values of orders such as the Praxics. But should Ikora and Zavala's hardline stance on the use of the darkness and its powers change despite this newly discovered reality, the ramifications might still be catastrophic, regardless of the fact that it is seemingly true that the darkness and light are morally divorced from good and evil. A declaration that the powers of the darkness are acceptable for Guardians to use might even go as far as splitting the Last City internally. After all, it has seen schisms and splits before, and it has been split over less. At this point, I could bring up the rift created between Osiris and the Speaker by their feud, or I could bring up the faction war that eventually would birth the consensus in the Vanguard near the beginning of the city's history. But I think the most prominent example is actually one that boiled over into a fully fledged rebellion, the defection of the Concordat. Originally, their leader Lysander was part of the Core Consensus Council, the ascendant body of 3 factions that had direct representatives standing alongside the Vanguard and the Speaker. When Osiris was elevated to the position of Vanguard Warlock Mentor, Lysander was exceedingly displeased. He believed and seemingly told everyone that he had proof that Osiris was a mistake, an experiment of the Golden Age that had gone wrong and been misincarnated as a human by a faulty ghost. Not quite sure that's the way I'd describe Sagira, but those were certainly Lysander's words at the time. It isn't clear if this is what led to the Concordats' crusade and rebellion, but what is clear is that they rose against the whole of the consensus in doing so, and against the Speaker. Eventually, the new monarchy would meet them in battle at Bannerfall and would crush their forces decisively. Guardians who were in the thrall of Lysander would eventually need to be reintroduced to the Guardian population instead of banished, and it would take a long time for those Guardians that were under Lysander's thumb to slowly work their way back to more mainstream views. But this does still show the importance of that conflict. It shows that the city has been split over less, and that the scars of a split like that still exist to this day. Even now, if you go to Bannerfall, you can see many of the bullet holes that have been left by conflict, and some of those have been left by Crucible matches, sure, and some of them have been left by the Red War, of course. But some will still have been from the oldest times in which there was conflict on those walls, the time when the soul of the lost city itself was up in the stakes, when Guardian fought Guardian, and the new monarchy crushed the Concordat. If the Vanguard should decide to use stasis, or should lift their forward-facing ban on the use of dark powers generally, the lost city might be changed irrevocably, and you can be certain that this at bare minimum would lead to a complete upheaval of the status quo. That's our best case scenario though. That's only if people openly accept that dark powers do not mean dark intentions, that those who wield stasis and strand and any powers we might discover from this point onwards can in fact do so with the intent of protecting the lost city. This is not guaranteed to happen, and if it does, at very minimum, it means a retreat from the ideology of those who would align themselves with the Praxic Creed and any who would also bring a hardline stance on the use of darkness powers. Such a conflict, at best, is only going to lead to upheaval, but at worst, the Guardian ranks themselves could be split down the middle and could be plunged into civil war, and the rest of the lost city might be dragged in along with it. This is important to understand because at this moment in time, those divisions and those lines already have left scars. You only need to read the stories told in the Trials of Osiris Gear to understand that those wielding light and dark with good or ill intention can cause a great degree of suffering. Such a conflict would be unlikely to occur anytime soon, especially when we are united by the common foe of the Witness and its armies that surround us. Even if those armies have retreated into the Pale Heart, following it through and stopping its final shape from coming to be is of utmost importance. But when those common foes are defeated, those with incompatible ideologies will start to see their former allies not necessarily as trusted friends, but as ideological rivals, and instead of plans for peace and reconstruction, they may start to draw up new battle lines. New conflicts may arise. Zavala's own decision to at least investigate stasis, and any future decision he might have to use stasis or darkness powers, is of course deeply important to him on a personal level. It reflects the ideas that he has begun to take on about the Traveler and the Light, the idea that these perspectives do not need to be couched in good or evil, something that slowly he is coming around to. And it also deeply reflects the personal tragedy that he has endured in hundreds of years of service, watching so many of his friends and family die around him, seemingly for nothing as the Traveler looks on silently. But his personal decisions have wider-reaching consequences, as do Ikora's. If they decide to begin using darkness powers, it could mean grave things for the lost city generally. Him and Ikora need to walk with care, even if the power of the darkness is necessary for the survival of the people he protects. The Praxic Order is clearly not the only one watching, and who knows what might be the spark that ignites this fire. But that's all from me for now. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and leave a like, and if you have any thoughts of your own, go ahead and leave them down below in the comments section. Help feed the algorithm. Was this interesting? If it was, go ahead and let me know down below too. I'll have more video content out for you next week, and you can expect a lot more stuff changing as we go onwards into February. But for the moment, that's all from me for now. As per usual, know that your viewership, as always, is quite enough for me. And that in the meantime, my name is Bife. Per audacia ad astra. I'll see you, Starside.